Liberal Senator Dave Sharma was, of course, the local member for Wentworth that takes in Bondi Beach. Senator, thanks very much for joining us. I'll get to that bill in a moment. We do have some breaking news I'd like to get your opinion on. New South Wales Police are set to respond, this will happen tomorrow officially, to a planned protest, here we go again, at Sydney's Town Hall on Friday evening. The group will be protesting Chris Minns' anti-protest laws and Israel President Isaac Herzog's visit to Australia. Now, if that protest goes ahead, this will be staged during the current 2-week ban on such events, which doesn't expire until next Tuesday. You're a former ambassador to Israel. You know Herzog. What's your view on this protest going ahead?
Well, I think it's extremely ill-advised and very insensitive, and I hope New South Wales Police and New South Wales authorities do not allow it to go ahead. I mean, I just ask you, Steve, where's the protest about people's human rights in Iran? I mean, there's reports of anywhere between 2,000 and 12,000 protesters having been murdered, killed by the security forces in Iran. But I haven't seen those people come out and protest the rights and freedoms of those people. Instead, they're continuing with their demonisation of Israel and, by extension, their intimidation of the Jewish community a mere 1 month after the worst terrorist incident on Australian soil in our history. I just think these people, they have no regard for their fellow Australians, and they are single-minded in their purpose, which is to make the Jewish community feel unwelcome in their own country.
It seems to me that the police now have, certainly until next Tuesday, the wherewithal to prevent this protest going ahead. They've been reluctant to do that in the past. We saw the march across the Sydney Harbour Bridge. We saw the disgrace on October 8 on the Sydney Opera House steps. But they have the legal right to arrest people who turn out to this protest. That's my reading of it. Do you agree?
That's my understanding as well, Steve, as a result of the measures that were put in place by the New South Wales government following the Bondi terrorist massacre. And I think those powers are there. They should use them. I mean, I think everyone would say in retrospect that the ongoing weekly, sometimes more often, protests that have accompanied us in the past 2 years have had horribly unintended consequences. They have raised the temperature considerably. They haven't done anything to address the problems they purport to address, whether it's the war in Gaza, whether it's Hamas disarming, whether it's Israel's conduct of that war. All they've succeeded in doing is raising the temperature and basically giving license to more extremist elements. We've seen chants used in those protests which should fall foul of the law. We've seen the symbols of listed terrorist organisations waved aloft. I think the entire effect of those protests has been nothing other than damaging to Australia, and the idea that they should be allowed to continue, I think, is preposterous.
We'll see what the police have to say today. As you pointed out, Senator, today is exactly a month on from that dreadful terrorist attack. How do you feel? I mean, you're an important part of that community. How do you feel the community is now coping?
Look, I spent a few hours this afternoon with Rabbi Ullman, and it was one of his sons-in-law, Eli Schlanger, who was a rabbi who was killed on the 14th of December, but also many members of his community, his synagogue. And I can tell you that, unsurprisingly, that community is still deep in grief and deep in shock. I mean, I went and visited Eli Schlanger's office in the synagogue. They were moving his books around. His office has been kept for now as a remembrance of him, and that community is struggling to recover and rebuild. And, there's still wounded people in hospital. There's still people dealing with their injuries. And, of course, for those who've lost loved ones, there's still an enormous sense of grief and loss that, I think will take a very long time to heal, if ever.
Are they getting the care, the mental health care that they need if required?
Look, I believe the community is pulling together and looking after their most vulnerable and the most needy. And I asked the rabbi today, is there anything more that I can do personally, that others can do, any assistance from the government or mental health and counselling services? He's in regular touch with me about these issues, but I think it's important that we provide all the support necessary. But I think even with all that, a loss of this enormity and shock and magnitude and the manner in which the lives of these people were taken that causes very deep wounds, and the best mental health care in the world, I don't think, can necessarily heal those.
The Prime Minister has now been dragged kicking and screaming to hold a Royal Commission. Are you happy with its structure as you know it?
As I understand it, yes, I think it's important. I think it should have been done much sooner. I think it was unfortunate that the family members of victims, rather than being allowed to grieve and mourn, had to become, public advocates for a royal commission. It shouldn't have taken as long as it did. It shouldn't have required the sustained public campaign from all walks of Australian life to get it off the ground. But now it's important that, we support it, all Australians support it, and that it is forensic and unhesitant in examining the facts and causes, not only the operations on the day, but the whole enabling climate and the rise in anti-Semitism these last 2 years in Australia, and does everything it can to uncover failings and make recommendations for things we need to do to prevent such an attack ever taking place again on our soil.
I don't expect you to have read the legislation that's going to come before both the lower house and the Senate next week. You'll be back in Canberra as part of the Senate. What you've heard about these hate speech laws that Anthony Albanese announced on Tuesday, do you have similar fears to others I've heard today that this could in fact be used to trample over people's rights of freedom of speech?
Look, it's a very complicated area. I only saw the legislation yesterday. It's 100 and odd pages, about 133, I think, of new legislation. The explanatory memorandum, which explains how this legislation will operate, is over 300 pages. So it's complicated. I've been following the very truncated and shortened hearings into this legislation, but I think it's clear that a number of different groups have concerns, from faith-based groups, the Jewish community, but also others, about how this legislation will work in practice. And I would say it's more important that we get it right than we do it in haste in such a complicated area as this. So um, without the Parliament having the time to get across the detail of this legislation, without affected groups and interested groups and, lawyers, community groups, religious groups having had the chance to express their opinion on this, I think it's important that we allow that process to play out a little more fully. Yes, these are a high priority. Yes, I think we need to do clamp down on basically incitement to hatred based on religion or race. But it's also important that I think we get these details right, because this is a complicated area involving people's civil liberties, our own constitutional structure and freedoms. And I think we need to be close in examining the detail of this and make sure that we satisfy as many varying interest groups here as we can.
As I mentioned, Senator, you were the local member. You still live in the electorate, as I understand it. The future of the Bondi pedestrian footbridge is up for debate. I heard Chris Minns with his view. He believes that it would be better if it was knocked over, but he's not going to intervene there. He's going to leave that up to the local council. Do you have a personal view on what should happen to that bridge, which I'm sure you've walked over dozens and dozens, if not thousands of times?
Yeah, look, many times, and I think, as you said, Waverley Council's considering this. Look, I don't have a dogmatic view on this, but I do think using the bridge as some sort of memorial to commemorate the loss and remember this tragedy would not be a bad use of the bridge. I don't think I'm attracted to tearing it down for the sake of it. I think it's an important part of a tragic history and an event that we should always remember, and retaining the site, although it has many sad and tragic connotations, I think would be an important part of that remembrance exercise. But look, of course, I would be guided primarily by the victims, the family members of the victims, and what they would like to see happen here.
Yeah, I think we put it into their hands and let them decide. And, there's one argument being put today that if you bulldoze it, you're letting the terrorists win. So I tend to agree with you. Just before you go, can I ask you about this idea of a National Day of Mourning announced for next Thursday, the 22nd of January? Are you in favour of that?
Yes, I am. I think, look, that's basically, it's in the Jewish tradition. And not all the victims were Jewish, I hasten to add that, but the majority of them were. Uh, 30 days after the funeral of someone who's passed, it's a commemorative occasion where you remember and honour their lives. And this, depending on who the victim was and when they were buried, this 22nd of January would be in that vicinity. And I think it's an important occasion for our nation to come together after the initial shock and trauma and grief of the attack itself, the subsequent funerals, the makeshift memorial, if you like, at Bondi Pavilion to reflect and remember that tragedy. And I think that I am in support of that. I think it's an important occasion for us to reflect and remember.